We got thrown out because someone overheard me shout the word 14 YouTube video about Jeremy Clarkson. That can be quite controversial.
In this week's episode, Matt makes a YouTube video asking, is Jeremy Clarkson going to prison? Some say he's the most controversial television host in TV history. Some say he's the greatest motoring journalist in the world. All we know is he's called the Jeremy Clarkson. In his time, he's offended minorities, politicians, car companies, broadcasters, even entire nations. He's caused offence, but has he committed any criminal offences? I'm a solicitor. I specialise in crime. My considered professional opinion is, oh yes, the crimes of Clarkson are many. Lights out, here we go. I only have time for the highlights. In October 1998 at the Birmingham Motor Show, Mr. Jeremy Clarkson started his engines by saying the designer of the Hyundai XG had eaten a spaniel for his lunch. He also called people working for BMW Nazis. BMW saw the funny side, but Hyundai didn't have a sense of humour and complained to the BBC.
I've sparked fury. I've always sparked fury every day.
And we're off! That's inciting racial hatred and an offence under Section 4 of the Public Order Act 1986. In 2002, Welsh Assembly member Alan Pugh wrote to the BBC complaining Clarkson was encouraging people to speed on Welsh roads. The BBC said that was nonsense, but incitement to commit a crime is an offence in common law.
You just go, oh no, I've said that out loud.
A bit of controversy makes for lots of free publicity, which gets people watching his TV shows. He's on a lucrative crime spree. In February 2004, the greatest motoring journalist in the world tested the strength of the Toyota Hilux by driving it into a horse chestnut tree. That's criminal damage and careless driving. The BBC apologised and paid £250 in compensation. Guilty! In March 2004 at the British Press Awards, he swore at Piers Morgan, then punched him, leaving him with a scar above his left eyebrow. Now you might think that was a public service. Clarkson, though, applied opposite lock by admitting the offence on a chat show.
Yeah, I punched him.
Yeah. You're 43 years of age.
And then you hit the editor of a national newspaper.
Now that's a confession, admissible in court. That's assault occasioning actual bodily harm under Section 47 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861.
We've had a complaint, someone's hearing what you're saying, and they've asked if you can leave.
Yeah, of course. Why would they complain?
Because you're talking about Nazis and BMWs and stuff.
Oh, Jeremy Clarkson called BMW Nazis. It's a thing about that.
So,
Okay, no problem. No problem at all. No worries, darling. I'd like to take this opportunity to unreservedly apologise for using the words Piers Morgan in this video. I am truly sorry. Oh! Don't forget to subscribe. In November 2005, Clarkson moved up a gear and called the Mini quintessentially German. He made a mock Nazi salute and said the GPS only goes to Poland. That's inciting racial hatred. Also, in November 2005, in the Times newspaper, Clarkson admitted driving a Bugatti Veyron at 240 miles an hour. In France, the speed limit in dry weather is only 80 miles an hour. He's guilty by his own admission. In September 2006, the whole country waited with bated breath to see if Richard Hammond had survived a horrific 300-mile-an-hour crash in a jet-powered vampire dragster. In December, Jezza Clarkson used his drifting skills to describe the Daihatsu Copen as being a bit gay. That's homophobically aggravated public order offence, outraging public decency, and an offence under the Telecoms Act. People complained, and the BBC agree. In April 2007, he described the Malaysian Perodua Kalisa as the worst car in the world, saying its name was like a disease and it was built in jungles by people wearing leaves for shoes. Again, that's incitement to racial hatred and a public order offence and a breach of the Telecoms Act.
Jeremy Clarkson is a patronising, self-important, snide, two-faced, self-hating, arrogant waste of an NUJ card, if he has one.
In July 2007, he drank gin whilst driving to the North Pole.
Yes, I'd like a gin and tonic. Can't have a gin and tonic because we're in the Arctic Ocean.
Oh, mate.
What? You've got gin!
That's not drink driving, said Jezza. He wasn't in the UK. The North Pole is ice. So Clarkson said they were sailing.
Please do not write to us about drinking and driving because I'm not driving, I'm sailing.
But it is an offence under the Merchant Shipping Act of 1995 and Section 80 of the Railways and Transport Safety Act of 2003. The BBC gave him a good telling off for glamorising drink driving. By this time, Jezza was a huge star. There was a petition signed by 50,000 people demanding he be made Prime Minister. In 2008, at the Hay Festival, he claimed to have been given a speeding ticket for driving at 186 miles an hour on the Limehouse Link Road in London. That's not speeding, that's dangerous driving under Section 2 of the Road Traffic Act. In November 2008, Clarkson joked about lorry drivers murdering prostitutes.
Change gear, check your mirrors, murder a prostitute, change gear, murder, check your... That's a lot of effort.
That was a reference to the Suffolk Strangler, offensive but not a criminal offence. In February 2009 in Australia, he called the British Prime Minister Gordon Brown a liar and a one-eyed Scottish idiot. The Royal National Institute for the Blind said he should be taken off air. Clarkson apologised for calling the PM blind, but he clarified it saying he wasn't going to apologise for calling him an idiot. That was offensive, but not an offence. But he hadn't finished with Gordon Brown. In July of 2009, Clarkson was reported to have called the British Prime Minister a silly during the warm-up to a show.
Isn't that outrageous? And Jeremy Clarkson should apologise for those comments.
It wasn't on air, but arguably that's an offence under the Public Order Act. Then in July of 2010, Clarkson upset gay rights campaigners, saying, "I demand the right not to be bummed." Hilariously, the BBC later said they cut the remarks from the show as it was too long to fit in. Again, that's homophobically aggravated public order offences and a breach of Section 127 of the Telecommunications Act 2003. Clarkson is a prolific offender. In August 2010, he described the Ferrari F430 as having special needs and looking like a simpleton. Media regulator Ofcom upheld the complaint. That's a Section 4 public order offence and a breach of the Telecommunications Act once again. It's time to pit and change to slicks. In November 2011, on the BBC's One Show, he was asked about a public sector strike that was going on that day. At the time, the BBC had a policy that every show, and even guests on shows, had to have opinions that were balanced. Everybody knew it was dumb, including Jeremy, so he said it was great that the roads were empty because of the strikes, and then, in the name of balance, he added,
We have to balance it though, don't we? Because this is the BBC.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Frankly, I'd have them all shot.
The programme apologised, Clarkson apologised, the BBC apologised. It's offensive, but it's not an offence. But at this point, it was clear that the politically incorrect Clarkson was deliberately winding up the woke snowflake BBC bosses.
You can't be politically correct when you're doing a job like mine.
Clarkson became as efficient as a German car factory when it came to manufacturing controversy. His offensive offences were fuel injected. In January of 2012, he upset an entire subcontinent in the Top Gear India special, making jokes about Indian food, clothes, toilets, trains, and even Indian history. That's arguably incitement to racial hatred under Section 17 to 29 of the Public Order Act. Then things took a nasty turn.
Top Gear presenter Jeremy Clarkson's in trouble again. There have been thousands of complaints.
And he spun out of control. Clarkson sort of mumbled the N-word as he recited the nursery rhyme, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. The Daily Mirror published the clip in May 2014. It was never aired, it was never on TV, and to his credit, Clarkson did make a very public and grovelling apology. The BBC, rightly this time, took a very dim view and gave him a final warning. Do that again, and we really will sack you. But he had already done it again. The Top Gear Burma special aired in March 2014. At the end of the show, Clarkson and Richard Hammond are admiring the bridge they built, and Clarkson says, "This is a proud moment, but there's a slope on it." That's inciting racial hatred and a breach of the Telecoms Act. Then he did it again. In October 2014, in the Patagonia special, he drove a Porsche 928 in Argentina with the license plate H982FKL. Argentine war veterans thought it was a reference to the Falklands War and were not happy. It wasn't an offence, but he was very nearly punished by some very angry locals who pelted the crew with stones, rocks, bricks, and even attacked them with pickaxe handles. And that brings us to March 2015. It's late at night. The weather is awful. Jeremy Clarkson arrives late at the Simon Stone Hall Hotel in Yorkshire after a long day filming. He asks for a steak. The chef has gone home and he's told he can have a cold meat platter by 37-year-old producer Oshin Timmon. Clarkson calls him a lazy Irish and punches him in the face, splitting his lip. That is racially aggravated assault. His victim ended up in hospital. There were lots of witnesses. The BBC suspends Clarkson and takes Top Gear off the air.
I've been suspended, haven't I?
We will not be renewing Jeremy's contract.
There was a huge public outcry. Over 1 million people signed a petition demanding the show and Clarkson be reinstated. The Director General of the BBC got death threats. Now, this has always struck me as a little bit suspicious. You see, Clarkson and his old schoolmate and Top Gear producer Andy Willman had bought 50% of Top Gear from the BBC a few years earlier. The idea was to tie them to the BBC.
It's a programme based on deep but passionate loathing.
Top Gear was a juggernaut of a show. It was watched worldwide and the rights were sold globally. There were DVD sales, a magazine, a live tour. In 2011, Clarkson's production company, Bedder 6, made over £15 million in pre-tax profits. Clarkson's salary went from just £900,000 to £2.7 million a year, making him easily the highest paid talent on the BBC. Bedder 6 paid Clarkson a dividend of £9 million in 2011. Understandably, that upset James May and Richard Hammond. After all, they'd contributed to the success of the show. They wanted more money.
So did you really get on in real life?
No.
Is that why you're standing so far away from me?
Yes.
So in March 2012, the deal was renegotiated. The BBC bought Top Gear back from Bedder 6 for around £15 million, and Captain Slow and Hamster and Clarkson signed a new 3-year deal, with Hammond and May now receiving a share of the Top Gear profit.
I've said many times before, the man is a knob, but I quite like him.
Then, 2 amazing coincidences happened at the same time. By amazing coincidence number 1, exactly 3 years, almost to the day when the contract was due to expire, with all the filming in the can, all contractual obligations met, Clarkson, the master of controversy, allegedly punched a producer in the mush, forcing the BBC to finally put its foot down and sack him, giving him more free publicity than he could ever have imagined. Then, by amazing coincidence number 2, Amazon Prime buys a brand new motoring show called The Grand Tour. It's the same show. The BBC owned Top Gear, so they kept the Stig, but otherwise it's identical. 3 blokes mucking about with cars. Amazon bought 3 seasons of the Grand Tour for £160 million, about £4.5 million per episode. The BBC were only spending about £500,000 on each episode. Salaries for Clarkson jumped to £10 million, with Hammond and May on around £7 million each. Now, I love Top Gear with those 3, and I really admire Jeremy Clarkson, but that whole bizarre punching the producer thing always struck me as a bit fishy. The police interviewed Clarkson under caution, but he was never prosecuted. So, did he commit a crime? Well, maybe. In November 2015, the producer Oshin Timon did sue Clarkson and the BBC for racial discrimination and personal injury. They settled out of court for £100,000 and Clarkson apologised. In effect, he accepted guilt. I still think the whole thing was a stunt, but what a brilliant stunt! Clarkson bought Top Gear and then sold it twice. First to the BBC for £15 million and then to Amazon for 10 times that. Genius! At the time, I'd never heard of the Prime streaming platform, but when Clarkson took the show to Prime, I signed up just to see 3 buffoons bickering and buggering about with cars. Which brings us to the most recent scandal.
More than 6,000 complaints following comments made by Jeremy Clarkson.
In December of 2022, in his Sun column, Clarkson attacked Meghan Markle, saying he hated her and looked forward to the day she's paraded naked through the streets of every town in Britain while the crowds chant shame and throw lumps of excrement at her. It was a joke, a Game of Thrones reference, not libelous as its opinion and humour. Not very funny either, but not a crime. But that bad joke about Meghan Markle might be the end of the road. Prime are rumoured to have dropped Clarkson and cancelled his shows, Clarkson's Farm and the Grand Tour. If they cancel Clarkson by cancelling his shows, I will cancel Prime by cancelling my subscription. So, has Jeremy Clarkson committed crimes? Yes. Is he going to prison? Well, no. Until now, he's got away with it. You see, I really am a fan of Jeremy Clarkson. Yes, he offends people, but controversy sells newspapers and books and TV shows. What he says is never mean-spirited. It's naughty schoolboy humour. He never really grew up. He was a naughty boy expelled from posh Repton school, and he's still keen to make his mates snigger at the back of the class and wind up the masters. But make no mistake, he's one of our best journalists. Not just car reviews. The stuff he filed with the late A.A. Gill in the Times was simply magical. On TV, he has transformed Top Gear from a crappy little consumer advice show into the biggest TV show in the world. He invented the modern car show with his independent Christmas DVDs. But when he makes documentaries, that's something else. Treat yourself to the greatest raid of all, or the Victoria Cross, or the Isambard Kingdom Brunel episode of Great Britain's. It's a great trilogy. It's a trilogy of Clarkson at his best. No farting about, no cars, no sensation, just great documentaries. Serious, informative, inspiring, yet entertaining. At his best, he's the greatest storyteller in the world. Watch Inventions That Changed the World or Clarkson Meets the Neighbours. It's all on YouTube. There are links in the description down there. Watch Clarkson's documentaries. They're wonderful. You'll love them. The real crime here is that he hasn't made more.